Imagine trying to organize the most chaotic species in the galaxy. Now imagine that species is humanity. Director Selex had worked with many alien civilizations during his long career in the Galactic Council. Some were difficult. Some were stubborn. Some were simply strange. But humans were something else entirely. They argued about everything. They argued about borders, about money, about culture, about religion, about politics. Sometimes they even argued about things that did not matter at all. They fought wars over tiny pieces of land. They debated endlessly on public networks. They created endless distractions for themselves. And somehow, in the middle of all that noise, they managed to ignore the things that truly mattered. That was the problem now sitting on Selex's desk. Weapons. Every species that joined the Galactic Council had to submit a complete list of their weapons. It was a simple rule. The information allowed the Council to build security scanners, train peacekeeping forces, and maintain order across thousands of star systems. Most species completed the task within a few days. Humans had taken 3 months. And they still had not delivered anything useful. Inside the committee chamber, the discussion had already turned tense. Zofar was the first to speak. The tall red alien leaned forward in his chair, folding all 4 of his arms across his chest. 6 thin antennae grew from his head, each one ending in a blinking eye that moved independently. Several of those eyes focused directly on Selex. Director, Zofar said carefully, we must address a very simple reality. This task is impossible. The room fell quiet. Wazak shifted inside his moisture field, the thin layer of humidity that surrounded his amphibian body. His yellow eyes narrowed slightly. What exactly do you mean by impossible? He asked. Zofar tapped a control panel. A holographic display appeared above the table. Lines of light spread outward in every direction, forming a massive web of interconnected nodes. These, Zofar said, represent human governments. Selex leaned back slightly. The display was enormous. Hundreds of nodes filled the air. Humans maintain over 500 independent governing bodies, Zofar continued. Each one claims authority. Each one controls its own military forces. He pointed towards several clusters. Inside those governments are additional layers. States. Provinces. Corporate territories. Autonomous regions. The hologram expanded again. Now the network looked even worse. Many of these groups developed their own weapons technology, Zofar said. And they do not share that information. Wazak let out a slow breath. That is, inefficient. It gets worse, Zofar replied. He made another gesture. New nodes appeared. These represent private corporations. Human companies that build weapons for profit. The hologram now looked like a glowing storm. There are at least 80 major defense manufacturers, Zofar said. Each one hides their most advanced designs. Sometimes even from the governments that buy them. Selex rubbed the edge of the table with his claws. He already knew where this was going. But Zofar was not finished. And beneath all of this, the alien continued, there are classified projects. His voice became slower. Black programs. Secret laboratories. Military experiments that officially do not exist. The hologram zoomed deeper. New connections appeared. Hidden layers. Shadow networks. And finally, Zofar said, we reach the individual human. Wazak blinked. The individual? Yes. Zofar turned several eyes toward Selex again. Humans collect weapons personally. They keep them in homes, garages, basements. Some even build their own. Silence filled the chamber. They inherit weapons from ancestors, Zofar added calmly. They trade them. They hide them from their governments. One of his eye stalks twitched. They call this freedom. The room stayed quiet for several seconds. Then Zophyr finished. So I repeat my conclusion. No single human can provide the list we require. Not the governments. Not the corporations. Not even their military leaders. He paused. Because the list does not exist. Selleck said nothing. On the surface, he looked completely calm. But beneath the table, the tip of his reptilian tail tapped slowly against the floor. Tap. 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 It was an old instinct from his species past. Thousands of years ago, his ancestors had used their tails as weapons in battle. Now the small movement only appeared when he was thinking very hard. Wozzeck leaned forward. If that is true, the amphibian said carefully, then humanity cannot join the Galactic Council. Zophyr nodded. Correct. Wozzeck's throat sac inflated slightly. Without a weapon registry, we cannot calibrate security scanners. We cannot train peacekeeping forces. We cannot define legal limits for weapon usage. His voice rose slightly. And without those systems, human integration becomes a threat to galactic stability. Selleck finally spoke. So your solution, he asked quietly, is to reject humanity entirely? Zophyr hesitated. For the safety of the galaxy, yes. Another voice entered the conversation. Tall. Calm. And very hard to ignore. That may not be possible anymore. The giant alien Hara leaned forward over the table. Her species came from a low-gravity world, which meant she was almost twice the height of everyone else in the room. Her long fingers tapped slowly against the metal surface. Humanity already has provisional membership, she said. They have trade agreements. They have embassies. She paused. If we suddenly reject them now, it will not look like their failure. Her eyes moved toward Selleck. It will look like ours. The room became silent again. All three aliens were now staring at him. Selleck's tail stopped tapping. His mind was already working through the problem. There had to be a solution. A dangerous one. But possibly the only one. Finally, he spoke. I may have an idea. Selleck looked at the three members of the committee. All of them were waiting. He could feel the pressure in the room. If this problem failed, the responsibility would fall directly on him. Still, an idea had already formed in his mind. Dangerous. Unpredictable. But possibly effective. There may be one way, Selleck said slowly. Zophyr tilted several of his eye stalks toward him. What way? Selleck folded his hands together on the table. We stop asking humans individually. The others exchanged confused looks. Then Selleck continued. We ask them all at once. Wozzeck blinked. All of them? Yes. Selleck leaned forward slightly. We summon every human ambassador in the galaxy. Zophyr's eye stalks twitched rapidly. That would mean representatives from every human government. Correct. How many exactly? Selleck activated a small data pad. The number appeared above the table. 553. The room went quiet again. Wozzeck stared at the number. That many, in one place? Yes. Hara slowly straightened her enormous frame. And what exactly do you expect them to do? Selleck answered immediately. We lock them in a room. For several seconds no one spoke. Then Zophyr's antennae stiffened. You cannot be serious. Oh, I am completely serious, Selleck replied. He stood up and began pacing slowly across the chamber. We bring them all together. One hall. One room. We present them with the requirement. And we tell them something very simple. He stopped walking. They do not leave, until the list is finished. Wozzeck's throat sac inflated again. That sounds extremely hostile. It is not hostile, Selex said calmly. It is motivational. Zophyr shook his head. You are underestimating human behavior. They will argue. They will refuse. They will claim the task is impossible. Yes, Selex said. They will. He turned back toward the table. But not alone. The other committee members watched him carefully. Selex continued. Humans have one very interesting trait. They compete with each other. Constantly. Hara nodded slowly. That observation is accurate. Selex tapped the table. If we present this as a public challenge, they will not want to fail in front of each other. And if they do fail, Zophyr added, they will blame one another. Exactly. Selex allowed a small smile. And the entire galaxy will be watching. Now the idea was beginning to settle in. Wozzeck thought for a moment. So, humanity's council membership depends on this task. Yes. And they must complete it together. Yes. And they must do it publicly. Selex nodded. Correct. Hara crossed her long fingers together. How much time will they receive? Selex considered that question carefully. Not too long. Too much time allows excuses. Too little time creates chaos. He finally decided. 1 week. Zophyr nearly dropped one of his data tablets. 1 week. Yes. That is absurd. Selex shrugged. That is the point. The room stayed quiet again. Finally, Wozzeck spoke. And if they refuse? Selex answered calmly. Then the integration process ends. We announce that humanity failed to meet council requirements. And the responsibility will clearly belong to them. Hara slowly nodded. That protects the committee politically. Exactly. Zophyr still looked doubtful. There is another problem. Selex raised an eyebrow. Which is? Where do we even hold this meeting? 553 ambassadors. Plus assistants. Plus security teams. Plus documentation equipment. Zophyr gestured widely. No council facility can hold that many beings. Selex sighed quietly. That will be difficult. But he already knew the answer. We find a species with a large ceremonial hall. We rent it. No matter how expensive. Wozzeck looked slightly worried. This operation will attract enormous attention. Hara nodded. Then we control the narrative. All 3 committee members turned toward her. This summons, she continued, must come directly from the office of the Galactic Council President. Otherwise humans may ignore it. Selex thought about that. She was right. If this demand looked like ordinary bureaucracy, humans would argue about it forever. But if the order came from the highest authority in the galaxy, refusing would become extremely embarrassing. Agreed, Selex said. I will prepare the proposal tonight. Zophyr slowly leaned back in his chair. I still believe this plan will fail. That is possible, Selex admitted. But right now we have no better option. He looked around the room. Any final concerns? No one spoke. The silence meant agreement. Selex nodded once. Then we proceed. The meeting ended shortly afterward. One by one the committee members left the chamber. But Selex remained seated. His tail tapped slowly against the floor again. Tap. 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 He was thinking about what he had just started. If the plan failed, humanity would be rejected. If it succeeded, he honestly had no idea what would happen. 3 months later. Selex stood in front of the largest door he had ever seen. The hall belonged to a species called the Gorath. They were enormous beings who gathered here only once every few centuries. Renting the structure had taken weeks of negotiation. And a terrifying amount of money. Behind the door waited something even more terrifying. 553 human ambassadors. All inside one room. Wozzeck stood beside him, adjusting his moisture field. "I am not ready for this," the amphibian admitted quietly. Zophar's eye stalks were moving nervously. "This will become a disaster." Hara remained silent, towering over all of them. Selex placed his hand on the door control. "If it becomes a disaster," he said calmly, "then at least the responsibility will not be ours." Zophar made a skeptical sound. "You really believe humans will cooperate?" Selex hesitated for only a moment. "I believe humans hate losing." Then he pressed the door control. The massive entrance began to open. And inside, hundreds of human voices were already shouting. The massive doors opened slowly. A wave of sound exploded into the hallway. Humans were talking. No, that was not the right word. They were shouting. Arguing. Laughing. Debating. Making deals. All at the same time. Selex stepped inside the enormous hall and immediately felt overwhelmed. The Gorath had built this place for giants. The ceiling stretched so high it almost disappeared into shadow. Massive stone pillars surrounded the chamber like the trunks of ancient trees. But the committee had modified the center of the hall. A huge semicircular table now filled the space. And sitting around that table were humans. Hundreds of them. Selex slowed his steps. He had studied humans for years, but seeing this many in one place was something else entirely. There were humans with dark skin. Humans with pale skin. Humans with brown, red, blonde, and even blue hair. Some wore expensive suits that looked stiff and uncomfortable. Others wore long ceremonial robes decorated with gold threads. Several were dressed in military uniforms covered with strange symbols and medals. A few wore very simple clothing. Plain tunics. Loose shirts. Sandals. Some humans looked like powerful leaders. Others looked like philosophers. A few looked like criminals. And all of them were talking. Loudly. Selex could hear dozens of languages at once. Some sounded sharp and fast. Others slow and musical. Several ambassadors were arguing across the table. Two others appeared to be negotiating a trade agreement. One group was laughing loudly over something on a handheld device. The noise filled the entire hall like a storm. Selex paused for a moment. Then something strange caught his attention. Very strange. He leaned slightly toward Wozzeck. "There is a problem." Wozzeck blinked. "What kind of problem?" Selex pointed toward one section of the table. "That ambassador." Wozzeck followed his gaze. Then his throat sac inflated slightly. "Oh." Selex narrowed his eyes. "That is not a human." The ambassador in question had fur. Gray fur. She had pointed ears, a long tail, and very clear feline features. At that exact moment she lifted her arm and calmly licked it. Like a cat grooming itself. Selex stared in disbelief. "That is definitely not a human." Wozzeck sighed. "She represents the human colony on Felix Prime." Selex turned slowly. "You assigned that colony?" "Yes." "And their ambassador is a cat?" "Technically," Wozzeck said carefully, "she belongs to a species called the Flesian." Selex blinked. "Then why is she sitting with the human delegation?" Wozzeck looked slightly embarrassed. "The humans elected her." Selex stared again. "She has a tail." "Yes." "She is licking her arm." "Yes." "And humans chose her as their representative?" "Yes." Selex was silent for several seconds. Finally he asked one final question. "Is this related to their strange obsession with cats?" Wozzeck nodded. Very much so. Selex closed his eyes briefly. Then he forced himself to move forward. The center of the hall was still several meters away. Hundreds of human eyes were beginning to notice his presence now. The noise slowly started to fade. Conversation by conversation. Voice by voice. Until finally the hall became quiet. Selex stepped onto the central platform. A voice amplifier activated beneath his feet. Now everyone could hear him. He straightened his posture. Ambassadors of humanity. His voice echoed across the massive chamber. My name is Director Selex. I represent the Species Integration Committee of the Galactic Council. Hundreds of humans were now watching him carefully. Some looked curious. Others looked suspicious. A few already looked annoyed. Selex continued. You have been summoned here to address a critical requirement for your species. A few whispers moved through the crowd. Selex raised one hand. Every civilization that joins the Galactic Council must provide complete documentation of their weapons. He spoke slowly and clearly. This information allows us to calibrate security scanners. It allows our peacekeeping forces to identify dangerous technology. And it ensures that all member species operate with transparency. Several human ambassadors were already shaking their heads. Selex ignored them. Unfortunately, he continued, human society presents a unique challenge. You are divided into hundreds of independent governments. Each with separate militaries. Separate technologies. And separate secrets. The whispers grew louder. Selex raised his voice slightly. For 3 months we have attempted to gather this information. But the process has failed. Now the humans were definitely unhappy. A man in a military uniform stood up. That's because what you're asking is impossible. Several others nodded loudly. Selex lifted one hand again. Which is why we have chosen a different solution. The hall became silent. Selex delivered the next words very carefully. You will complete the task together. Confusion spread across the room. What does that mean? Someone shouted. It means, Selex said calmly, that you will remain here until the work is finished. The reaction was immediate. Voices exploded across the chamber. You can't do that. This violates sovereignty. This is ridiculous. One ambassador stood on his chair. This is diplomatic imprisonment. Another shouted something in a language Selex did not understand. Someone threw a pen toward the center of the room. It landed several meters away. Selex spoke louder. You will produce a complete inventory of all human weapons. Every category. Every design. Every system. His voice echoed again. You have 1 week. 7 standard galactic days. The shouting became even louder. Selex finished his announcement. The doors will remain sealed. Food and water will be provided. You may contact your governments for information. But you will not leave this hall. He paused. Until the list is complete. The room exploded into chaos. 2 ambassadors immediately started arguing face to face. Another group began shouting across the table. The feline ambassador arched her back and started hissing at someone. Selex turned away calmly. His work here was done. Behind him the noise grew even louder. As he reached the exit door, he glanced back one final time. 2 humans were now physically fighting. Another was standing on the table giving what looked like a speech. The cat ambassador had climbed onto her chair and was yelling something extremely angry. Selex stepped through the doorway. The doors closed behind him with a heavy metallic sound. The corridor outside was suddenly quiet. Wozak exhaled slowly. Well, he said. That went badly. Zofar shook his head. They are going to kill each other in there. Selex looked at the sealed door. Possibly. Then he turned and began walking away. But if they do? He paused. It will not be our fault. Exactly 1 week later. Director Selleck stood outside the enormous doors of the Great Hall once again. This time he was alone. In his hand was a small communication device. A powerful voice echoed through it. Director Selleck. Even after many years of service, that voice still commanded respect. President Kazareth. Leader of the Galactic Council for nearly 3 centuries. I wanted to personally congratulate you, she said. Selleck kept his posture straight. Thank you, Madam President. You handled the human situation very well, she continued. There were many doubts about your strategy. Selleck allowed himself a small breath. The humans did the work themselves, he replied calmly. I only created the conditions. There was a soft rumbling sound from the other side of the call. A draconic chuckle. Modesty is admirable, the president said, but we both know the truth. You solved a problem that appeared impossible. Selleck felt a small surge of pride. Recognition from the council president was rare. I assume, she continued, that you are about to collect the documentation. Yes, Madam President. I am standing outside the hall now. Excellent. There was a brief pause. Director, well done. The connection ended. Selleck lowered the communicator slowly. For a moment he allowed himself to enjoy the victory. 3 months of work. Endless negotiations. Hundreds of human governments involved. And now it was finished. He placed his hand on the door control. The massive doors opened. Slowly. The sight inside surprised him. The humans looked terrible. Many had dark circles under their eyes. Their clothes were wrinkled. Hair was messy. Some ambassadors were half asleep in their chairs. Others were quietly drinking strong-smelling beverages. But the chaos from last week was gone. No shouting. No fighting. No screaming. Instead, there was organization. And against the far wall, there were containers. Large storage containers. Dozens of them. Stacked neatly in rows. Selleck walked toward the center of the room. Hundreds of tired human eyes followed him. He stopped at the central platform again. Ambassadors, he said. His voice echoed across the hall. I trust you had a productive week. A few humans laughed weakly. Someone clapped slowly. The feline ambassador yawned and stretched her tail. Selleck continued. I am here to receive the weapons inventory we discussed. He gestured politely. If someone could please bring me the list. For a moment nothing happened. The humans exchanged glances. Then a voice from the back shouted something. Selleck only caught part of it. Too long. 47. The room suddenly erupted with laughter. Not polite laughter. Real laughter. Loud. Almost hysterical. Selleck frowned. He waited for it to stop. Eventually the noise faded. An older human man stood up. He had thick gray hair and a large beard. Tears from laughter still sat in his eyes. Director, he said. You misunderstood something. Selleck tilted his head slightly. Please explain. The old man pointed toward the containers. The list is not 47 pages. Another wave of laughter spread through the room. It is 47 volumes. Silence filled Selleck's mind. Volumes, he repeated slowly. Yes. 47. He gestured again toward the containers. Each one is about 800 pages. Selleck felt his tail go completely still. That seems excessive. Oh, the old man said. That is just the physical documentation. He smiled slightly. We also created digital archives. Selex blinked. How large are those archives? About 970 million files. The number hung in the air. Selex stared at him. I believe. I would like to see the books. Immediately a younger human stood up. She hurried toward the containers. A moment later she returned carrying 2 massive volumes. Each one was thicker than Selex's arm. She placed them carefully on a small table. Volume 1, she said. And Volume 47. Selex opened the first book. The title page was simple. Comprehensive Inventory of Human Weapon Systems. Volume 1, Primitive and Historical Weapons. He turned the page. The table of contents stretched for several pages. Striking weapons. Cutting weapons. Projectile weapons. Pre-gunpowder weapons. Gunpowder weapons. Incendiary weapons. Chemical weapons. Historical biological weapons. Dozens of categories. Selex flipped forward randomly. Bow and arrow. Classification, ranged projectile weapon. Historical origin, approximately 70,000 years ago. Still in use, yes. There were diagrams. Measurements. Material compositions. Range statistics. Variants. Dozens of them. Longbows. Recurve bows. Compound bows. Crossbows. Each with full specifications. Selex flipped another page. Blowgun. Classification, lung-powered projectile weapon. Historical origin, 40,000 years ago. Still in use, yes. Often used with poison darts. A reference note pointed toward Volume 2. Poison inventory. 38 different toxins. All carefully documented. Selex felt something cold forming in his chest. He slowly closed Volume 1. Then he opened Volume 47. The title made his eyes narrow. Exotic Physics and Experimental Weapons. He flipped to a random page. Antimatter Cannon. Classification, Exotic Matter Weapon. Development status, Experimental. 3 known prototypes. Maximum yield, catastrophic. Minimum safe firing distance, 1 astronomical unit. Selex's claws tightened slightly. He turned another page. Relativistic kinetic impactor. Projectile velocity, 92% the speed of light. Yield, extreme. Deployment platforms, 23 known warships. Another page. Orbital kinetic bombardment system. Human name, rods from God. 6-meter tungsten rods dropped from orbit. Impact energy equivalent to multiple tons of explosives. No explosive material required. Selex turned pages faster. Nanotech disassembly swarms. Atmospheric collapse chemicals. Planetary biological extinction agents. Temporal displacement experiments. And one final entry. Stellar compression device. A theoretical weapon capable of collapsing a star. Estimated result, destruction of an entire solar system. A note at the bottom read politely. Please do not build this. Selex slowly lifted his head. Every human in the room was watching him. Some looked proud. Some looked amused. Some looked extremely tired. One woman in a business suit leaned forward slightly. The blueprints are public now, she said calmly. Just like you requested. A voice from the back added loudly. Congratulations, Director. You forced us to publish everything. The humans started laughing again. This time. Selex understood why. Selex stood in the center of the hall. Volume 47 was still open in his hands. For the first time since the meeting began. He felt uneasy. The humans were watching him carefully. Some were smiling. Some looked proud. Others looked like they were trying very hard not to laugh again. The woman in the business suit spoke again. "You asked for complete transparency," she said calmly. "So we gave you everything." Another ambassador leaned back in his chair. "Every design. Every system. Every terrible idea humans ever invented." A few people chuckled. Selleck slowly closed the book. His voice came out quieter than before. "This documentation," he paused, "will be available to the entire Galactic Council." "Yes," the woman replied. "Public access. Just like your integration policy requires." Another voice spoke from the far end of the table. "Fully indexed too. Searchable database. Cross-references. Video demonstrations." Selleck turned his head slowly. "Video, demonstrations?" "Of course," the old bearded man said. "It helps with understanding." Several humans laughed again. But the laughter had a strange tone now. Not cruel. Not friendly either. Just, knowing. Selleck suddenly felt something shift in his thoughts. A quiet realization. The humans had done exactly what he asked. But they had also done something else. Something much bigger. He placed the heavy book back onto the table. "Thank you, ambassadors," he said. "This documentation is comprehensive." "You're welcome," the woman in the suit replied. Her smile was sharp. "We're very thorough when properly motivated." Selleck turned and walked toward the door. His steps felt strangely mechanical. Behind him, the humans were already talking again. But this time the mood was different. They were celebrating. Laughing. Congratulating each other. They had achieved something impossible. 553 governments. Hundreds of cultures. Thousands of disagreements. And somehow, they had worked together. The door opened. Selleck stepped into the hallway. The heavy doors closed behind him. Silence returned. But inside his mind, the realization continued to grow. He had demanded a complete list of human weapons. And humanity had delivered it. Every design. Every blueprint. Every concept. Now the entire galaxy had access to it. Pirates. Criminal syndicates. Rebel groups. Ambitious alien civilizations. All of them. Selleck stopped walking. For the first time in many years. He felt afraid. Not immediately. But eventually. Someone would build those weapons. And when they did, the galaxy would change. 100 years later, historians would look back at that meeting. They would give it a name. The beginning of the lost century. Within 6 months, pirate groups began upgrading their weapons using human designs. Within 1 year, criminal organizations possessed antimatter technology. Within 5 years, entire regions of space had fallen into chaos. The simplest weapons spread the fastest. Kinetic impactors became extremely popular. Massive metal rods launched at incredible speeds. Humans had once jokingly called them throwing rocks really fast. But the results were devastating. Outposts vanished in seconds. Cities disappeared. Defenses designed for traditional warfare could not stop them. Then came the biological weapons. Engineered plague spread across unprepared worlds. Entire ecosystems collapsed. And the nanotechnology designs created a new nightmare. Microscopic machines capable of dismantling matter itself. The Galactic Council had never faced threats like these. Their peacekeeping forces had been trained for diplomacy. For small conflicts. For mediation. Not for full-scale war. But now they were fighting enemies armed with human weapons. Enemies who studied those 47 volumes like textbooks. For an entire century, the galaxy struggled to survive. Civilizations collapsed. Trade routes disappeared. Entire sectors fell into lawless anarchy. And through all of it, human technology kept advancing. Because publishing old weapons had not slowed human research. If anything, it accelerated it. Humans had a new problem now. They had to stay ahead of the weapons they had accidentally spread across the galaxy. So they built new ones. Better ones. More advanced ones. And they kept those designs secret. By the end of the lost century, order finally began to return. But the galaxy was different now. The old council structure had been replaced. Human representatives now held powerful positions in multiple security councils. Even the legendary President Kazareth eventually stepped down. The ancient rule about mandatory weapons documentation was abolished. No species would ever be forced to reveal their entire arsenal again. The cost had been too high. Humanity had proven two things to the galaxy. First, they were capable of incredible chaos. And second, they were also capable of surviving it. Some lessons are expensive. This one cost the galaxy an entire century.